The brutal reality on the battlefields of eastern and southern Ukraine is that a ceasefire remains a distant and seemingly unattainable goal. Despite the mounting human costs and the relentless destruction, the fundamental conditions required for a meaningful pause in hostilities, let alone a lasting peace, are entirely absent. The chasm between the non-negotiable demands of Kyiv and Moscow is so vast that it leaves no room for the kind of compromise that a ceasefire would necessitate. For both sides, the conflict has evolved into an existential struggle where the perceived cost of stopping the fight on unfavorable terms is far greater than the staggering cost of continuing it. This grim calculus, shared in different forms by the belligerent and their primary international backers, ensures that the war of attrition grinds on, with each side convinced that time and battlefield developments will eventually strengthen its negotiating position. Consequently, the diplomatic channels are frozen, and the language of war spoken through artillery shells, drones, and infantry assaults is the only form of communication that currently holds sway. Any discussion of a ceasefire is immediately entangled in the irreconcilable questions of territory, sovereignty, and future security guarantees, making a simple cessation of violence a complex strategic decision rather than a purely humanitarian one. From the perspective of President Volodymyr Zelensky and the Ukrainian government, accepting a ceasefire at this juncture would be tantamount to a strategic defeat. A ceasefire would freeze the front line, effectively creating a new de facto border that recognizes Russia's territorial gains. This is a reality that Ukraine has sworn it will never accept. Such an agreement would leave millions of Ukrainian citizens under Russian occupation, subject to filtration camps, political persecution, and the forced imposition of a foreign identity. It would also grant the Russian military a desperately needed operational pause to rest, rearm, and heavily fortify its defensive line, making any future Ukrainian counteroffensive to liberate its territory exponentially more difficult and costly. The Ukrainian leadership firmly believes that a premature ceasefire would not lead to a lasting peace, but would merely serve as a prelude to a future and perhaps even more devastating Russian attack once Moscow has reconstituted its force. This view is strongly supported by the Trump administration. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has repeatedly articulated that the United States will not pressure Ukraine into a false peace that rewards aggressions and leaves it vulnerable. In his view, a ceasefire that is not tied to a complete and verifiable withdrawal of all Russian force from Ukraine's internationally recognized border is not a solution but a recipe for future conflict. The military leadership in Kyiv, in concert with its American counterparts at the Department of Defense, shares this assessment. Secretary of Defense Peter Hegseth has been a vocal proponent of the peace through strength doctrine as it applies to Ukraine. His department's strategy is not focused on achieving a quick ceasefire, but on providing Ukraine with the advanced military capabilities it needs to change the strategic reality on the ground. These include the provision of long-range precision-guided munitions, advanced air defense systems, and armored vehicles, all intended to give Ukrainian forces the ability to degrade Russian logistic, break through fortified lines, and ultimately liberate their lands. From a military standpoint, a ceasefire now would halt Ukraine's momentum in Kyiv sectors and squander the strategic initiative it has fought so hard to gain. It would allow Russia to dig in and solidify its control over the vital land bridge to Crimea and other occupied territories, a strategic prize Moscow has no intention of relinquishing. The prevailing belief in both Kyiv and Washington is that the only path to a just and durable peace is through a Ukrainian position of undeniable strength, and that positions can only be achieved on the battlefield, not at a negotiating table under current conditions. Therefore, the continued flow of Western military aid is seen as the essential ingredient for creating the conditions for peace that is not merely a temporary pause in a permanent war. On the other side of the conflict, the Kremlin has its own strategic reasons for avoiding a genuine ceasefire that will require any retreat. President Vladimir Putin has invested immense political, economic, and military capital in the conflict, and a ceasefire that does not cement his declared territorial annexations would be portrayed as a significant failure. Moscow's war aim, while perhaps having shifted tactically, still appeared to be centered on the subjugation of Ukraine and the control of its key industrial and coastal regions. A ceasefire on Ukrainians' terms, requiring a full withdrawal, is a non-starter for Moscow. Instead, Russia has repeatedly used the concept of a ceasefire as a diplomatic tool, offering to halt fighting on the condition that its territorial gains are recognized. This is a cynical ploy designed to portray Russia as a peacemaker and to cast Ukraine and its Western allies as the intransigent parties prolonging the conflict. The Russian military, despite suffering heavy losses, believe that a protracted war of attrition ultimately favors its larger population and resources base. The Kremlin's strategy appears to be to continue applying relentless pressure along the extensive front line, grinding down the Ukrainian military and testing the long-term resolve of its Western partner. From Moscow perspective, a ceasefire is only desirable if it ratifies its conquest and allows it to consolidate control, creating a permanent and destabilizing frozen conflict that it can leverage to exert pressure on Ukraine and the West for years to come. The international diplomatic landscapes reflect this profound impasse. While many nations in the global South have called for an immediate cessation of hostility, their appeal have failed to gain traction because they do not address the core issue of sovereignty and territorial integrity. Third-party mediation efforts, whether from Turkey, China, or other nations, have repeatedly stumbled upon the same insurmountable obstacle. Russia will not leave the territory it has occupied, and Ukraine will not stop fighting until it has been liberated. The United States under President Trump has made its position unequivocally clear. The administration, through officials like the United States Trade Representative Jameson Greer and Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick, has emphasized the continuation and strengthening of the economic sanctions regime against Russia. The message is that there will be no economic normalization, no sanctions relief, until Russia ends its aggression and withdrawal from Ukrainian territory. This economic pressure is a key component of the overall strategy to make the cost of continuing the war unsustainable for Moscow. Attorney General Pam Bondi has also continued to work with international bodies to pursue accountability for war crimes, a process that underscores the view that there can be no return to business as usual with the current Russian leadership, making a negotiated settlement that they would accept even more unlikely. The reality on the ground is a grim testament to this lack of a diplomatic off-ramp. The fighting is characterized by intense artillery duels, attritional trench warfare reminiscent of the First World War, and the pervasive use of drones for reconnaissance and attack. In the Donbas region, battles for control of individual towns and villages continues with ferocious intensity, resulting in staggering casualty rates and the complete obliteration of urban landscapes. In the south, Ukrainian forces continue to probe Russian defenses, seeking to sever the land bridge to Crimea. While Russia launches its own assault to expand its zone of control, civilian suffering continues unabated. Russian missile and drone strikes regularly target cities far from the front line, hitting energy infrastructure, residential building, and other civilian targets. This strategy of terror is intended to break the will of the Ukrainian people and pressure their government into concessions, but it has largely had the opposite effect, strengthening their resolve to resist. For the soldiers in the trenches and the civilians in the cities, a ceasefire would be a welcome reprieve from the deadly threat of death and destruction. Yet, there is also a widespread understanding among Ukrainians that a ceasefire on Russia's terms would mean the loss of their country and their future. This national consensus provides President Zelensky with a strong mandate to continue the fight, despite the immense sacrifice it requires. The absence of a ceasefire is therefore not a result of a lack of a desire for peace, but a reflection of the profound conviction on both sides that the issues at stake are too fundamental to be compromised at this time. The war will continue because, for now, Both Ukraine and Russia believe that the path to achieving their core objective lies through continued conflict, not through a premature and unjust peace. Many of my listeners, like 70%, haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel. And so many of you don't even know that you haven't subscribed. And that is actually what makes the show going. It's almost like you're making a donation to the show. So that's why I ask again and again, because it enables us to grow and grow and grow. And we're going for the long haul here. And listen, if this is your first time listening to World Global Conflict, you don't have to subscribe. You guys, your first ones on me. But if you have watched this show before, it's like you are freeloaded now. So all I would ask you is, if you have seen this show before and you like it, help me, help my team here. Hit that subscribe and like button now, and we will continue to build this show for you. That I swear. Thank you to all of you guys who have subscribed. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much. That's all for me for today. I will see you soon. Bye for now.